one. So my name is Samantha Basile. I'm the Community and Adult Services Librarian here, and I also have the privilege to be the coordinator for Richmond Reads. I would like to thank, first of all, the Friends of the Library. They fund this program and they've been extremely generous in their funding. So we thank them for that. This is the third year of Richmond Reads, which is kind of hard to believe because last year was a weird, timeless year and nothing made sense. But many of you joined us last year for discussions and the online program. And if this is your first year with us, Richmond Reads is a community one-book program. The community, we encourage everybody to get together, read the same book, join us for programs, discussions, all those fun things. And then it culminates with a visit from the author. I will just say that this year's visit will be virtual again, just because for planning purposes, we needed to have a solid plan. And nothing's been solid with COVID, so it is a pleasure to have you all here in person. It's wonderful. This is our first real big adult in-person program, so thank you for coming. I would also like to thank the committee. They are all here this evening. Sue Briggs, Sue Chitty, Leslie DeLuz, Cindy Hagelberger, Irene Hickey, and Judy Sikora. They put in a tremendous amount of work for this program, so thank you to all of them. So we again put in many hours of reading for the program this year, and we read a lot of books, and we admittedly approached this year's reading looking for, we were all feeling a little worn down in the midst of the pandemic, and so we kind of lent away from books that were kind of more dramatic. We kind of were gravitating towards books that contained a note of hope and uplifting messages. And so the title that we have chosen was published in April of 2021. It has a long list of accolades. It was a Good Morning America Buzz pick, a Good Housekeeping Book Club pick, an Indie Next pick, a Library Reads pick, and it was recommended by People, The Washington Post, Woman's World, Book Riot, Bookish, Christian Science Monitor, and many more. Author Adriana Trigiani described this debut novel as uplifting, funny, bold, and inspirational. In another review, author Abby Dare said it was, excuse me, exactly the book I needed to read right now. I laughed, I cried, and in the end, I was left with a renewed belief that there is always hope for all of us, no matter how broken or stuck we may feel. So, this year's book, This year's book is The Music of Bees by Eileen Garvin. The Music of Bees follows three lonely strangers in a rural Oregon town, each working through grief and life's curveballs, who are brought together by happenstance. Alice Holtzman is a 44-year-old widow who feels stuck in a dead-end job and is still reeling from the death of her husband. She finds solace in her small farm and honeybees, but yearns for more. Jake is a troubled teenager who recently became paralyzed after an accident and is learning to live with his new reality of life in a wheelchair. Harry is 24 years old and is running from some regrettable choices he made as a younger man. He has recently arrived in Oregon. Rootless and friendless, Harry feels adrift and alone. Through a series of events, these three strangers all find themselves on Alice's farm, where they find a surprising friendship, healing, and maybe even a second chance, just when they least expect it. Beautifully moving, warm, and uplifting, The Music of Bees is about the power of friendship, compassion in the face of loss, and finding the courage to start over at any age when things don't turn out the way you expect. So at this time, I would like to welcome our special guest reader, Dan Fischer, award-winning broadcaster and president and general manager at WBTA, who is going to read us a portion of the first chapter.
to see everybody tonight. It's fun to actually read in person. At my day job, excuse me, these things are awful. One thing that does concern me is the size of the print in this book, which is quite small. And when I write up news scripts, I use that 18-point font. You get about 3 words to a page. So bear with me. I'll try to do this as best I can. Music of the Bees by Eileen Garvin. Chapter 1. Those who suppose that the new colony exists wholly of young bees forced to emigrate by the older ones, if they closely examine a new swarm, will find that while some have the ragged wings of age, others are so young as to be barely able to fly. Jacob Stevenson had the tallest mohawk in the history of Hood River Valley High School. Even before it was listed as an official yearbook record, he was pretty sure about it. In his senior photo, it was a blue-black masterpiece that flared up to a height of 16.5 inches. Well, almost. It was more like 16 3/8, but close enough to silence any of his quibblers. Jacob had put 6 months into growing the spiky mass, which he sculpted into 4 sections, and it had reached an optimal height right before spring's finals last year. On this morning, he surveyed the masterpiece of his hair in the mirror and felt no little satisfaction that he'd managed to maintain it for more than a year now, despite unforeseen challenges. The undeniable truth of a mohawk was that you were always fighting gravity, and at a certain point you lost. You had to be realistic. The idea was to aim for maximum volume that would hold over an entire day. A fallen mohawk would be a terrible embarrassment, especially for a boy of 18. Jacob had experimented with various products to maintain this loft. He tried egg whites, mustache wax, hairspray, and even some adhesive from a wood shop. And that was an unfortunate episode. All that experimenting revealed that a mixture of extra firm sculpting wax and professional grade hairspray was the best choice to maintain that 16 and nearly 1/2 inch height achievement. Noah Katz had taken the official measurement the night of the spring jazz concert. Both of them had been dressed in traditional black tuxedos that members of the Hood River Valley High School Jazz Band had been wearing for the past 20 years. Jacob thought then that his hair contrasted nicely with the powder blue cummerbund and bow tie. He posed with his trumpet as Noah snapped a photo. The phone dwarfed in this man's big paw. His cheeks shook as he laughed. "Sick, Stevenson." Katz was a good-natured lumberjack of a guy. The two had become friends at May Street Elementary in 5th grade. Jacob on trumpet, Noah on trombone. Noah did not have a mohawk. Noah's hair was crazy curly, and he referred to it as the situation. Unlike Jacob, he did not need any product to make his hair resist gravity. He grew curls up and out, chiefly to irritate his mother. "Look out, ladies," he crowed, tugging on his curls with one hand so that he resembled a human dandelion in flux stage. He snapped a selfie. He then hustled into Noah's truck and they sped across town to the high school. They had been late, as usual, and Mr. Schaefer was mad, but their band teacher seemed always to be looking for a reason to yell at these two boys, and so it was no big deal. Remembering that night made Jacob smile. He turned his head from right to left. On either side of the mass of hair, he could see bits of stubble on his otherwise cleanly shaven skull. He turned on the faucet, dampened the washcloth under the tepid steam to wet his head. He squirted a soft puff of shaving cream onto his hand and patted it on the stubble. The lemony white foam smelled institutional like the hospital and made him feel slightly nauseated. He breathed through his mouth and picked up his razor. A mohawk took discipline. He had to wash it, or at least wet his hair, then comb it out, apply wax to the wet mop, part it into sections and dry it with a high-powered blow dryer before spraying it into place and then shaving the stubble. The process made him sweat on warm days like this one. It was a big investment of time, really, but that was cool. These days he had nothing but time. 2 hours to do his hair was no problem at all. The reality of that hit him like a punch in the throat, as it often did when he sat in front of the bathroom mirror every morning. The dark little hairs on his scalp poked through the white lather, standing up unwaveringly, while Jacob Stevenson, or Jake, as everyone but his parents called him, could not. Jake swallowed hard. It seemed so stupid, the mohawk itself and the mohawk record, considering that in addition to having the tallest mohawk in the history of Hood River Valley High School, he was probably the only kid there who'd ever had one in this farm town to begin with, which was short on punk and big on rodeo. It was also stupid because he no longer went to school there, having sort of graduated last spring, but mostly it seemed stupid because it was pretty much all he had to do on any given day. Fix his effing hair now that the doctor's appointments had tapered off and his physical therapy was down to once a month. He had all the time in the world to face the rest of his life in a wheelchair. Jake pushed back from the mirror and looked at his body, lean and muscled in his torso and arms. His legs didn't look terribly different than they had before, but sometimes he almost felt that they belonged to someone else. The wheelchair was why he had sort of graduated. The school administration had mailed his diploma to his parents' house, while Jake lay in the hospital 60 miles away in Portland. His teachers had all passed him, even though that was a stretch for a couple of classes, like phys ed, since he was in the habit of skipping to go to Noah's house after second period to get high before lunch. He hadn't darkened the gym door since before the Christmas break, but even Mr. McKenna wasn't enough of a dick to fail a PE student who was going to spend the rest of his life as a paraplegic. Jake's mother had told him that he'd be graduating when he was still doped up during those first days in the hospital. He sat next to his bed, her eyes puffy behind her pink framed glasses. She tried not to cry in front of him, although she barely left the chair next to his bed. She sat for hours holding his hand and murmuring that God was watching over him. She'd run through the list of people who had called and emailed to send their thoughts and prayers, his teachers, the neighbors, the mailman, people from church, people he'd never heard of, but didn't say that because he would have hurt his mother's feelings. She brightened when she got to the part about the graduation ceremony, which at that point was still weeks away. "We're so proud of you, honey," she said. "Your name will be in the program. They asked Noah to receive the diploma on your behalf since you won't be able to." Jake winced, his smile a grimace. "Since I won't be able to walk, you mean?" His laughter came out in short barks, and he couldn't stop. He blamed the drugs, but there was more to it. He laughed and laughed at the word walk, which had taken on a different meaning now that he had lost the use of his legs, his young, strong boy legs that had skateboarded and run and climbed, legs he had completely taken for granted every single day of his stupid life until the day he couldn't use them anymore. He couldn't stop laughing, even when his mom put her face into her hands and wept. He was such an asshole, he thought now, sitting in front of the mirror. He rolled forward and peered at himself, noticing how much thinner that he was from last spring. He laughed because the word walk had made him think of his father, Ed Stevenson, and his fleshy, angry face. The least goddamn thing you can do is walk your lazy ass down the aisle at graduation, Ed had said. You turn 18, you're gonna give you a knife and fork and we're gonna send you on your goddamn merry way. Well, that had been winter break of his senior year when Jake realized his grades didn't matter now that he'd lost his music scholarship and it seemed like he might actually flunk out. Well, don't worry about me, Ed, Jake replied. He'd begun calling his father by his first name when he started high school, knowing that it bugged him. I'll be out of here so fast you won't even see me go. Jake had decided to move to Portland after the dream of music school faded to impossibility last year. He figured he'd work in a music store or coffee shop someplace near the East Side clubs. He hadn't worked out the details, but hard could it be to get a job in a city that big? However, since Jake had injured his spinal cord, his lazy ass was firmly stuck at his parents' house. He wasn't going anywhere anytime soon, and there was nothing Ed or anybody else could do about it. He touched up the right side of his head, toweling it off, and started on the left, dragging the razor along the curve of his skull. The scraping sound was half thrilling and half sickening. His father was a part of a 6-man building crew for Clare Construction, and that meant he worked long hours on weekdays like this one. And those hours, even when they yawned wide and empty, were a relief to Jake. Weekends were harder when Ed parked himself in front of the TV with a half-pack of PBR and a bag of peanuts. Then Jake stayed in his room listening to music or surfing the web. His earbuds muffled the sound of his father's rattling cough, the ping of peanut shells into the bowl, the white noise of screaming fans, which always sounded the same whether or not the sport or the season. Jake looked around the bathroom at the lowered sink and mirror, the shower chair, grab rails, and the widened doorway. An experienced carpenter, his father, could have easily made those renovations in a couple of days to prepare for his only son's return from rehab, where Jake had gone after the hospital. But Ed hadn't lifted a finger. His mother's church group had it done, all eager to help Tasney Stevenson, the pastor's administrative assistant during this difficult time with her son. They took up a collection to pay for it and assembled a volunteer work crew before Jake returned home. His mom told him that when she came to visit him, she sat next to the therapy table in a flowered dress and sensible shoes, an outfit usually reserved for church or holidays. She could tell she hadn't wanted to make too much of the renovation to save his pride, but Jake knew his mom read it as a sign of God's love that all these people had come out to their crummy double wide to help Tansy Stevenson by helping her son. Jake lay on the table and his PT showed his mother the exercises she needed to help him do to prevent contractures, a permanent shortening of the muscles that would make him even more of a freak. He watched his foot move toward and away from his face in the PT's hands. He didn't ask if Ed had sat in front of the TV sipping tall boys while the earnest members of the congregation remodeled his bathroom. He didn't even have to ask because he knew Ed wouldn't even have had the decency to leave the house while they were doing the work that he should have done. That must have been hard for his mother, too. Anyway, he was grateful that he could use the damn bathroom by himself. Midway through chapter 1.